The sources for this deep dive presented us with a fascinating, almost unbelievable paradox. We often idolize science as this infallible, self-correcting engine of fact, right?
Exactly. A clean, linear march toward objective truth. That's the comforting myth.
But the shocking question that really fueled this for us was, how can a scientific truth, one that's been meticulously proven, observed, detailed, how can it be utterly forgotten?
Swallowed whole by intellectual history. For
Oh.
decades, even centuries, by the very community that's supposed to protect it.
It's the blind spots of intellect. And that's our mission today. We're diving into sources that detail how established facts, from the fundamental nature of air to complex neurology, just vanish from the record.
And we're looking for the scotoma, that dark spot, not just in the history of science, but in our own daily lives, in our own perception.
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Before we even step into the laboratory, we have to acknowledge the personal parallel here.
Absolutely. Because this isn't some esoteric quirk of history. It's built on fundamental human flaws.
Exactly. To understand how whole systems lose sight of the truth, we first have to look at the basic unit of that system, the human mind. So think about your own experience for a second. Have you ever had, repeating emotional responses, these persistent physical alarms, or even just crucial feedback from a loved one that you just filed away?
Or ignored, or just decided, I don't want to hear that.
Yes, and if our own individual consciousness is full of these ignored facts, these data points that contradict our preferred story, then science, which is just a collection of these minds, must have the same blind spots.
It has to. So the question becomes, was this forgetting just an accident? Some bad filing.
Or was it something closer to an intentional turning away, something driven by intellectual inertia or even fear?
Well, the sources confirm it's much closer to the latter. It points to ego, to the desire to protect careers, and maybe even just simple intellectual laziness driving the rejection of uncomfortable facts.
Okay, let's start with the hard evidence. Let's look at how a truth can actually be lost. Our first case study takes us back to the 17th century.
To a man who nearly discovered oxygen 100 years before the history books say he should have.
This is the story of John Mayo, right? In the 1670s.
It is. We all learn that Lavoisier is the father of modern chemistry for identifying oxygen in the late 1700s. But Mayo, through these incredibly careful experiments, heating, cooling things in closed containers, he meticulously proved the existence of a specific component in the air.
And he didn't just say it was there, he called it spiritus nitrarius. A concept so close to our modern understanding of oxygen.
Very close. And he showed that this component made up about 1/5 of the atmosphere, and that it was essential for both breathing and for fire.
He quantified it. This wasn't a vague guess. So why was he completely erased from science for over a century?
Because the entire scientific world was completely dominated by the phlogiston theory.
Right, phlogiston. The idea that when something burns, it releases this fiery element called phlogiston.
Exactly. So Mayo's idea that combustion actually consumes something from the air, it was fundamentally opposed to that whole system.
His truth had no conceptual ground to land on.
None.
Yeah.
An idea that's conceptually premature, born without a community ready to hear it or a language to even describe it,
Yeah.
it gets forgotten. It doesn't matter how factually correct it is.
And think of what chemistry lost by stubbornly clinging to phlogiston for another 100 years. That delay is just shocking.
It really is.
Okay, so let's move from chemistry to the brain, because here the blindness wasn't about an old theory. It was about where the data was filed. This is the old library case.
The geometric migraine illusions, it's a fascinating one. So modern neurology teaches us about the classic migraine aura, those shimmering, zigzag lines.
We have all some pictures of them.
Right. But some patients report seeing things that are far more complex. Perfectly rendered geometric lattices, spirals, rotating tunnels, even intricate moving fractal models. So a modern neurologist encounters this, goes looking in the established medical literature for a description, and finds nothing that fits.
And here's the kicker. To find the precise description of these visual disturbances, he had to look outside of the official medical journals.
He had to dig into a general science journal from the 19th century. And there it was, a precise, detailed account, written by the astronomer Sir John Herschel.
An astronomer, not a doctor.
And that was the problem. Because Herschel wasn't a physician, because his paper wasn't in the mainstream medical flow, a phenomenon that is absolutely vital for understanding neuroscience was just ignored for nearly a century. The truth was right there, but it was categorized incorrectly.
It's terrifying how much crucial data is locked away because it's not written by the right person or in the right journal.
And that leads to maybe the most visceral example of this.
Yeah.
Ignoring phenomena that simply contradicted deeply held assumptions about the body.
You're talking about achromatopsia, cerebral color blindness.
Yes. The condition where brain damage causes a total or partial loss of color vision. This was clearly described by neurologists in the 19th century. Yet the medical community actively ignored it for 75 years.
75 years. That's not passive forgetting. That's active resistance. What was the conceptual bias there?
The core belief, the absolute dogma, was that vision is a seamless whole. Neurologists just assumed that you could not neurologically separate color from shape and form.
So to accept achromatopsia meant accepting that vision could be modular, that the brain had sort of a separate track for processing color.
And that was simply too disruptive to the reigning model of brain function. So the data, the actual patient experiences, were just filed away as contradictory noise.
The truth didn't disappear from the world, it just disappeared from the community's consciousness because it didn't fit the frame.
And it completely dismantles the myth of science as this smooth, linear progression.
It's not a clean line at all.
Not at all. History is full of these stops and starts, rejections, detours. Science is more like a climber who keeps taking the wrong path, has to backtrack, descend, and circle all the way around to find the right way up.
And this kind of intellectual resistance, it isn't limited to obscure figures, is it? We see it even among the absolute giants.
Oh, absolutely. Think of Gregor Mendel. Discovered the fundamental laws of inheritance with his pea plants. But his work just sat there unrecognized for decades. Was he wrong?
No, not at all. He was just, again, too early.
Exactly. The science of cytology, the understanding of chromosomes, cell division, it just hadn't matured yet. So there was no known biological mechanism for his statistical laws to operate.
Or look at Alfred Wegener, proposing continental drift.
He was openly ridiculed. For decades, his observations were strong, but he lacked a viable mechanism. How could these massive continents plow through the ocean floor? It seemed absurd.
Until plate tectonics came along and provided the motor, the actual framework that made his observations make sense.
And then suddenly, he's a visionary. The resistance is ancient, too. Aristarchus proposed the heliocentric model in the 3rd century BC.
And it was suppressed for over a millennium by Ptolemy's geocentric model. The old model was just. It was simpler and more intuitive.
It fit the worldview. And even Einstein, the ultimate revolutionary, he famously rejected parts of quantum mechanics, calling it spooky action at a distance.
Because it just defied his powerful classical intuition.
Right. He tried to find a flaw in the data rather than accept the absurdity of what it was telling him.
The pattern is just inescapable. If the highest minds in history can miss the obvious truth because it challenges their intuition, we have to decode the mechanisms. Why do we do this?
Let's lay out the 4 layers of this blindness. The first one is what we saw with Mayo and Mendel, conceptual prematurity.
The idea isn't wrong. It just lacks the language, the infrastructure, the receptive community. It's a seed landing on rock.
Precisely. The second layer is pure cognitive inertia, conceptual bias. This is that deep-seated psychological defense of the old established model.
It's easier to just reject the data.
Much easier. The brain instinctively views deviant data as a threat to its stability and just files it in the reject pile. That's what happened with achromatopsia and the idea of seamless vision.
And that leads right into the third mechanism, which is more personal.
Psychological resistance and ego. The new truth often requires admitting that we were wrong, or that our life's work needs to be completely rethought. That pain triggers denial.
It's the Freudian resistance, isn't it? The mind just deflecting painful truths. It's easier to call Wiesner a crank than to dismantle 40 years of geological certainty.
And finally, the fourth layer, which is often conscious and systemic, power, prestige, and politics. When an influential scientist says, "I don't see that phenomenon, it's irrelevant," entire generations of researchers follow suit.
It becomes a battleground where the stature of the person promoting the idea matters more than the evidence behind it. So if these 4 mechanisms are powerful enough to bury the truth about oxygen and continental drift, how powerfully are they operating in your own mind right now?
That is the essential link. The cognitive mechanisms that create the scientific scotoma. They operate identically in your inner life. We're all just trying to maintain a coherent narrative about ourselves.
So we have to shine a light on that personal scotoma. You have to ask yourself, what repeating data in your life, the same pattern of failure, the same emotional reaction, What do you habitually ignore?
What symptoms, whether they're psychological or emotional, are you just medicating or enduring without ever asking, what is this trying to tell me? What message is trying to break through my own conceptual bias?
The great news, though, is that understanding these mechanisms gives us very specific strategies for becoming less blind, for being the scientists of our own lives.
Lesson 1, and this is the most important, embrace intellectual humility. The first step is admitting that despite your intelligence, you have vast zones you just cannot see.
The most dangerous person is the one who believes they've seen and understood everything.
Because that person is instantly impervious to new data. Lesson 2, investigate the small, overlooked details. Your personal breakthroughs often start with that recurring argument or that unprovoked surge of sadness.
Treat that stuff as hard data worthy of study, not just things to be dismissed.
Exactly. And lesson 3, this ties back to the migraine case. Keep and revisit your old library. Don't discard old journals or memories just because they feel irrelevant now.
Because you might reread those past experiences with a new framework, with more maturity, and suddenly find the enlightenment you missed the first time.
Those could be the Mayo or Mendel moments of your life hiding in your own history.
Lesson 4. Sit with discomfort. When a new truth, personal or scientific, challenges an old belief, your default reaction is denial, resistance, avoidance.
But growth only happens when you choose to stay with that discomfort instead of just shutting your eyes.
And finally, lesson 5. Avoid being the Ptolemy.
Yes. So many groundbreaking ideas were initially ridiculed because the listener just didn't have the framework to get it. So we have to approach others, a colleague, a child, a student, with respect.
Recognizing they might just be carrying a premature idea that you don't have the structure to accept yet.
Reduce judgment. Don't extinguish their idea out of hand.
So we've seen how systemic bias and personal ego can cause foundational truths to just vanish from the scientific record for generations. It forces us to confront that the real intellectual victory isn't changing the world.
No, it's the solitary effort of becoming less blind yourself. The scientific community eventually brought light back to these forgotten truths because a few people were willing to search the old libraries or push past bias.
And you have that choice. To continue living within your familiar blind spots, or to become that persistent climber willing to go back, take the detour, and ultimately see further.
So we'll leave you with this final thought. When you do manage to shine a light on your own internal blind spots, the facts about yourself you have habitually ignored, does that small, courageous illumination inevitably become a small guiding light for others as well?